Greetings, Internet. I'm John Bailey, the Popcorn Junkie, and here's what I saw this week. Before we get into the reviews proper, I did want to make a quick amendment to my I Care A Lot review. I still didn't like it, but as time has gone on over this past week, I have eased up on my visceral hatred for it, and especially after watching Kenny JD's video on it, which I'll leave in the link in the description below. I highly recommend you check out her review on it. She really brings out some interesting, because normally she just makes fun of bad movies, but this time she really got her film analysis on and kind of broke down different aspects of the film that didn't really hit with me upon first watch. So I highly recommend her video on it, and it probably won't end up on my least favorite of the year list, but I probably also won't go back and rewatch it anytime soon. So yeah, I Care A Lot. I'm easing up on. There's far bigger fish to fry. We'll get to one of them in a bit, but yeah, I Care A Lot, not as bad as I made it out to be. I just had a bad reaction to it upon first watching. Jesus, I thought we were done with this shit. So, most of y'all probably remember those really bad live-action versions of classic cartoons from the mid-aughts and onward. Things like Alvin and the Chipmunks, and the Smurfs, and Underdog, which apparently did happen. And most of y'all probably remember those movies kind of missed the point of the old cartoons. Specifically, the Smurfs, in that they just brought them to New York. And I stupidly thought that after the Smurfs gave up on that and just did a full-on animated feature, that we were kind of done with this style of cartoon remake. That we were kind of over the idea of let's just bring them to New York or wherever and doing an actual, full-on, faithful interpretation of the cartoon. Which makes this movie feel like the measles outbreaks that happened because of anti-vaxxers. The thing about Tom and Jerry is that, aside from the original run of shorts, they didn't really work. The Looney Tunes, they've been able to adapt and reinterpret into different ways, and the Looney Tunes have enough personality they can try different things and utilize them in ways that, have a story to them. When you try to add a story to Tom and Jerry, it doesn't really work. They're slapstick. There's not supposed to be a story. It's a series of gags. Looney Tunes has characters and motivations, and you can build a story around that. You can't really do that with Tom and Jerry, and that's why every time, most infamously with their attempt at co-opting Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, it didn't work. Some of the movies have worked, apparently. I haven't watched them all, but most of them kind of fail. Especially that full-length feature they did in '92. They just kind of missed the point of what made Tom and Jerry work. So, when they announced that this movie was coming down the pipeline, most people, myself included, were not exactly looking forward to it, because since they haven't worked yet, what is the likelihood of it starting to work now? And turns out that likelihood was very low. Now, the one thing I did want to point out, first, right off the bat, is the animation style. A lot of people are viscerally angry at it. They just do not like it. And I get it, because it is a very uncanny valley in terms of animation. It is right smack dab in between full-on traditional 2D style hand-drawn cartoons and fully rendered three-dimensional cartoons. It's not one or the other. It's smack dab in the middle, and it makes your brain go, what is happening? And yeah, that right off the bat is a bad thing. And that's the thing, is all of the animals are animated like this. Even like the dead animals being used for food are animated like this. And I don't want to ding the animators, because it's not their fault for wanting to make it more cartoony and make it feel like an old Tom and Jerry cartoon. That's not a bad instinct. The execution left a lot to be desired. And that's the thing, is that these models aren't fluid or fast enough to really work. There are points where it tries to, and they try to incorporate a lot of the older animation styles, like smearing and whatnot, to make things look like they're going faster, but it just doesn't quite work. It's not there enough, and it makes you wonder, why didn't they just stick with 2D, or hand-drawn, or go fully rendered 3D? Like, why is it this weird in-between? Not to mention the fact that it looks like they're just plastered on. There's barely any lighting or shading. They don't feel like they belong in the universe. They feel like they were plastered on after the fact. Now, we've done live action and cartoons. Going all the way back to the 30s, we've done live action and cartoons. Tom and Jerry did live action and cartoons with Gene Kelly. And there's the way you go about it is you make it feel like that cartoon is real. And Roger Rabbit did it probably the best. Not everybody can be Roger Rabbit, but even Space Jam and Looney Tunes Back in Action understood how to make it feel like that cartoon was in the real world and you could interact with it. There's a way to go about the production and make it feel like that thing is real. Here it felt like the actors weren't interacting with anything, and then the cartoons were plastered on after the fact. And then badly at that, because they don't have a real presence in the world. They don't feel like they're real, and once again, it pulls you out because it looks like you're not watching a real movie. Not to mention the fact that because these are Tom and Jerry, and because these cartoons are very physics defying, the rules for this world are kind of all over the place. Like, eventually gets to a point where it is very cartoony and physics defying, and then it makes you wonder, what exactly are the rules? Because that's the thing, is like, a lot of people will say, it's a cartoon, you shouldn't ask questions. Except it's not really a cartoon, is it? Because there's real people. If they wanted to make this, if they wanted to make this fully animated cartoon world, wouldn't raise an eyebrow. I wouldn't even question it. It's cartoon world, don't need to worry about physics. They use real-ass people, including Michael Pena, and they try to do all these cartoon physics-defying antics, and I question what are the rules, because those are real-ass people there. Like, if you wanted to make this a full-on cartoon, I wouldn't question it. Why are you making it live action if you want to lean more on the cartoons? That's what I'm asking. I don't know how much this is brought up in other reviews, but I noticed this immediately. And that is, we're back in New York. Because of course we are. It's a cartoon live action adaptation. Why wouldn't we go to New York? The Smurfs went to New York. He-Man went to the real world. Where the hell was Masters of the Universe? Hercules went to New York. When you bring a cartoon to live action, you gotta bring Enchanted. Let's bring her to New York. Everything's about New York. I could go the rest of my life without seeing another cartoon property brought to New York. We get it. New York's a nice place. It's interesting. It's weird. It's kooky. It's kind of, jarring even for regular people. We don't need to see that over and over and over again. We can be done coming to New York. This could have taken place anywhere. Anywhere. Didn't even need to take place in a real place. But no, we got to bring it to New York. Because, New York. Because New York. Why wouldn't we bring it to New York? It's good. Let's do New York again. Because that's not tired at all. That isn't to say that, like, the animation alone was what made this movie bad. Oh, no, 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 no. Even though this is from the co-writer of Brigsby Bear, a well-regarded indie classic at this point, or at least a cult classic. I don't know how. There's definitely an audience for it, and people did like it when it came out. And yet, this is what that guy brought us. And it makes me wonder, how much did he really write? Because I get the feeling that this was written and directed in the same way that a lot of the Disney live-action remakes were written and directed. So, it's hard to say. But yeah, this is recycled trope and bit throughout. When they're not recycling old Tom and Jerry bits, they're recycling old tropes from sitcoms from the 40s. You know, things like, I'm going to lie to get my way to a job that I'm not qualified for. And then, we got the big event coming up, better not screw it up. And, look, here's this, here's all these wild antics. And then, no, the wedding, this wedding, it's falling apart. How are we going to get the bride and groom back together? Because they're so in love, apparently. And yeah, it's just tired trope after tired trope. And they don't really bring anything new to it. Like, there really aren't any interesting characters at all in this movie. The cartoon characters are better defined than the humans. So even if the animation did look like it fit in this world, there wouldn't be a point because the script sucks and the human characters aren't interesting. Chloe Grace Moretz is trying. I'll give her that. She at least tries to do something with this garbage. She at least wants to make it look like she gave a shit. Michael Pena doesn't really give a shit. Ken Jeong doesn't really give a shit. Colin Jost doesn't give a shit. Rob Delaney, I think, is the hotel manager. He don't give a shit. Nobody really gives a shit. Why should they? It's Tom and Jerry, the movie. Who gives a shit? Nobody, apparently. Oh, by the way, speaking of Colin Jost, can we throw him in the bin with Jared Leto and Casey Affleck? Not because he did anything bad, but because he's an untalented hack. Like, seriously, why is Colin Jost around? Why are we keeping him around? He's not funny. He's probably the worst Weekend Update anchor SNL has ever had. And he's just kind of a smarmy douchebag. He is every yuppie villain from the 80s rolled into one person. Why are we keeping him around? Who wants him around? Why do people... I don't get it. Like, I could go the rest of my life without seeing Colin Jost again. Mainly because I don't have to watch him, because I don't watch SNL. I watch good shows. What's interesting is, and I don't know when the Double Toasted thing will come out for this, but I watched them review it live. And Corey, I was waiting for Corey to go off on this because it's right up his alley. He's big on talking about these kinds of things. Most of the main cast is kind of eclectic. You've got Michael Pena, who's Hispanic. The main character is a white girl. There's a quasi, not really love interest in a black bartender there that doesn't really go anywhere because why would it? You've got an Indian woman being married to Colin Jost because it's okay when a white dude marries an Indian woman, but God forbid the black bartender and the white chick end up together. But most of the voice acting cast is predominantly black. Specifically, you've got a reggaeton artist playing Butch, who was the Black Alley Cat from the old bits. You've got a rap group supplementing that with his little gang of alley cats. You've got Tim Story voicing a pigeon for one line. And then you've got Bobby Cannavale as Spike the dog. He's probably the one non-black voice actor in this. And then Lil Rel Howery shows up as the Angel and Devil Tom for a couple of bits. And Corey is more blatant about it, but yeah, these voices feel they feel like, specifically the Alley Cats, they feel like a Hollywood executive's idea of how, street level black dudes talk. It's and like Lil Rel Howery is doing his bit, but he's not exactly a great fit because it's his and when you've got the fact that there's an entire subset of stunt casted alley cats played by quote unquote gangsta style musicians. I'm not familiar with their music. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't, but that's the persona they give off. It feels like that's another throwback that we're apparently still doing. This stereotypical street black voice for these characters. And maybe that's Tim Story wanting to incorporate any level of blackness into this movie, but my God, does it feel out of place, because it feels like a white executive's idea of how black people sound. And it does not work anywhere at all in this movie. Thankfully, it's only in like those alley cats show up in like 2 scenes, and Lil Rel Howery shows up for like 2 instances. But yeah, it sounded wrong. And like, I'm fine with having recasting Butch and the Alley Cats or whatever, but if they were, interesting, well acted, well written, it wouldn't be a problem. But no, it's stereotypical gangsta talk, street talk. It's people, it's stuff that they would give to like, hoodlums and thugs on the street in like a stereotypical comedy or whatever, It's stuff that white executives think is funny. And yeah, it does not work at all. Namely the fact that Butch, I'm going to show a slight clip up here. Butch does not look like he fits in the world at all. Tom at points does. Butch looks like he was plastered on. This is exactly what I'm talking about. So yeah, I don't have a problem with a black voice cast. I think of Steven Universe, where it has a very eclectic, across the board voice cast. But the thing is, those voice actors can act and are directed well. That's not what we got here. It's basically like they threw these guys in a booth, told them to read the lines, and said, okay, that's a wrap. That's all we're paying you for today. Like, it doesn't sound like anybody cared or tried at all. Oh, speaking of throwing in black culture out of nowhere and to no effect, the movie opens up with pigeons mouthing along, quote, singing, whatever you want to quote, however they intended it, to Can I Kick It by A Tribe Called Quest. And normally, you're opening with Vistas of New York, you're going for things like, I don't know, Empire State of Mind by Jay-Z, or, something else that's big, some other big New York template song. You don't think of Tribe Called Quest for cartoon animal sing-alongs. Like, why a Tribe Called Quest? Like, why them? And I think, I don't know if they're officially owned by Warner Music or something, that maybe they were in the library and free to use for this movie, but it don't make no sense that these pigeons are singing along to A Tribe Called Quest. Why is A Tribe Called Quest in a Tom and Jerry movie if it doesn't have it? I don't understand what the point is, other than A Tribe Called Quest exists. We have access to their songs. Let's use Can I Kick It for the opening of Tom and Jerry, the goddamn movie. This is by no means the worst movie of the year. When music exists, and we've got that 4-hour cut of Justice League coming out, this movie is barely going to scratch into the top 10, if at all. But nah, man, this ain't it. And this is just another reminder that nobody has any idea what they're doing with Tom and Jerry. Just let Tom and Jerry be. Stick to the Looney Tunes. They're easier to adapt. Those new shorts are great. If you're going to do Tom and Jerry, try some new shorts. Maybe they'll work. Apparently some did. They released a couple. But this art style, what they're doing, nah, man, scrap that. Go back to the drawing board. Try again.
You think I must stop singing that song? You grandkids will be singing Strange Fruit.
As another Black History Month comes to a close, we take a look back at one of Black history's greatest icons, Billie Holiday. as presented to us by Lee Daniels. Now, I'll admit, I'm not the most familiar with Billie Holiday. I've heard various things about her life. I know that they did a movie back in the 70s with Diana Ross called Lady Sings the Blues. I do want to check that out at some point. But I know that she had some drug issues. She was a very big jazz singer and was met with pushback specifically about her song Strange Fruit, which detailed lynchings. And that's the whole point. I mean, when you know that it's about lynching, the title Strange Fruit just tells you everything you need to know. And the song still holds up. I re-listened to it while the movie was playing, and yeah, it's a killer song. So I can understand wanting to make a biopic about her. I don't know why you let Lee Daniels do it, though. Now, like with Billie Holiday, I'm not the most familiar with Lee Daniels' work. I know that he directed Precious. I haven't seen The Shadowboxer, his debut, or The Paperboy, which he wrote and directed. And really the only movie I saw of his was his last directorial film, The Butler. And I haven't seen Star or Empire, which he co-created. So I don't know his oeuvre. But between this and The Butler, I kind of get the idea that he's like a secondary Tyler Perry. Like, Tyler Perry is much more of a soap opera style, melodramatic, caricature sort of director. Like, he just directs, he doesn't write characters, he makes caricatures, and he makes soap operas essentially, even when they're trying to be serious, they're soap operas. Lee Daniels has that same sort of style to it, but access to higher grade actors. Like, Tyler Perry is getting whoever he can get, whereas Lee Daniels has access to Forrest Whitaker and freaking Oprah. And so but the style of filmmaking and direction of acting feels pretty on par, at least from what I've seen, between the two movies of his I've seen and the number of Tyler Perry movies I've seen. There's a definite similarity, if nothing else. Which is the thing, like, this is specifically about her drug charges, which were essentially just a means of her to stop singing Strange Fruit. And that's a powerful story to tell. Her struggles with addiction, her abusive relationship, the government trying to silence her. That's all powerful stuff, but Daniels is not the person to direct that. Like, that's somebody you want to give to at least an Ava DuVernay, if nobody else. Like, there's like a Spike Lee or a Ryan Coogler could really handle this subject material, but Lee Daniels? You sure about that? Because I wouldn't trust this guy with Black history the same way. Even the guy, Shaka King, with Judas and the Black Messiah, he handled that fairly well. Where's somebody like that handling the Billie Holiday story? Why is it the soap opera director? Like, there's even points where the abusive part of the relationship in this movie I can't take seriously because it feels like Tyler Perry directed What's Love Got to Do with It? Like, Billie Holiday's story is touching and moving and powerful and should be told, and yet Lee Daniels is not the guy to tell that story. And this is a screenwriter who has adapted Native Son and Their Eyes Were Watching God, I believe. Was that it? She's adapted these, powerful Black stories before, so I don't know if it's her script that's the problem so much as it's Lee Daniels' direction that I feel is the problem. The one real standout I will give is Audra Day. She is nailing it as Billie Holiday, both the singing voice and the speaking voice. She does her best trying to present Billie Holiday to us, and I really want to see more from her because I think she's very capable as an actress, and I want to see what else she can do. And maybe she'll play Billie Holiday again in a better movie, but even if it's like on Broadway or something, like seeing this woman succeed is something I want. But she alone isn't a good reason to see this movie. I definitely will be digging more into Billie Holiday at some point. I do want to hear more about her life, and I do want to check out more of her music, and maybe I'll watch a documentary. I do want to watch Lady Sings the Blues because I hear that's fantastic, even if it doesn't dig into this part of her life story. But yeah, nah man, you can skip this. This is cheap and tawdry.
I like it like that.
Billie Eilish, The World's a Little Blurry. Streaming exclusively on Apple TV Plus February 26th.
As I'm trying to keep up with new releases this year, I do want to try and include more documentaries in my watch list. I think one of my biggest regrets in covering movies is I've fallen behind on my documentary watching. And I started off great this year with MLK FBI, so now let's check out what Billie Eilish is doing. Eilish is one of those musicians where I've heard bits and pieces about her and how, like, her relationship with her brother and her various, struggles with fame and her own, her own health issues. And her music I've always found fascinating. This sort of dark, ethereal, electronic style. It's kind of almost emo to it, the way it sounds and some of the lyrics. She's a really interesting musician, and so I was interested to see what a documentary would help illuminate more about her and where this style, where this person came from. And for a good chunk of the movie, that is what we get. Before delving back into the usual music documentary trope of concert footage, I think one of my biggest issues with music documentaries is that they essentially serve as concert films. They don't really provide any backstory on the artist, and whatever little there is just surface level. It's mostly just a means of exploiting the fans. I've heard that about the BTS documentary. I know that from the Justin Bieber quote-unquote documentaries. Their music documentaries seem to feel more like press releases, not so much like informative digs into the artist's life. And I was kind of disappointed that that's what we got from here, because I always got the feeling that Eilish was much more honest, not so flashy, not so, not so that, like, I was expecting a documentary about her to be more honest, and we did get good honesty. We did get some good backstory into where she came from, but then as the time went on, it just felt like concert. Here's her meeting fans. It's just, and sometimes it plays into it, but a lot of the times it just feels like it was just a way to pander to fans again, and I just feel like that's disappointing, considering I really was interested in learning more about Eilish. But what we did learn was really interesting, specifically her relationship with her brother Phineas and how they kind of created this sound together. He helped produce the music, he helps with writing lyrics, and they really are a collaborative duo when it comes to this, even though she's kind of the face of it. And their sort of relationship, how it's their teenage, and that's the thing, is that we're dealing with teenagers. The movie, one of the opening scenes of the movie is Billie Eilish getting her driving permit. And yeah, we're dealing with that age. So there's a lot of angst, even if it's not over anything in particular. There's just this sort of, I guess the thing is that Phineas, I kind of got the idea that he was a bit high on himself. Like there's one scene early on where the dad compliments a song that they were working on by comparing it to another song. And then Phineas goes off and like, it's not like another song, Dad. And it's like, dude, shut up. Get over yourself. Yeah, you're writing a decent song. You're writing a good song, maybe even a great song. Sorry that your music sounds like, I don't know, other music. Yeah, Phineas came off as a very pretentious twat at points, which he was a teenager. I don't know how old he is now, but God knows I was like that too. So I get it. It's just, as an adult, I'm looking back on that now and I'm thinking, get over yourself. You get, I don't know why I'm using so much British slang. I don't know where it comes from. I don't even watch that much British TV. The other thing you really notice, specifically from Phineas, but a little bit from Billie, is that they have this very driven personality. Phineas specifically will want to do this, get this right, do this thing. And that could be very easy. I don't know how much it was exploited by the record companies once they actually got picked up, because we don't really get into that part of it now, do we? Because by that point, we're just dealing with concert footage. But that sort of mentality can drive a lot of burnout if you're not careful. And you do kind of see bits and pieces of it. And there is even a couple of guys there at one point telling Phineas that, dude, no pressure. You don't need to push yourself. There's not an issue here. And we never really get to explore that a bit more. Although Billie, we do see, suffers a bit of physical issues. She throws her neck out and gets shin splints during a concert. One time in Milan, she accidentally sprained her ankle. And like, she's a teenager and she's getting all of these injuries just from basic performing. Like, not even elaborate performing. Like, Billie Eilish isn't doing dance numbers the same way that like a Beyonce or an Ariana would do. She's doing fairly basic dance numbers, if you can even call them that. They're just, a lot of jumping and, nothing too elaborate. And yet she's still getting these injuries and doing her body's, some harm. And I think that's why it's better that sometimes she's more stationary. Sometimes, she'll sit down, do more acoustic stuff. And yeah, I think that's good, because you don't want to damage your body so much, especially at such a young age. And so when it covers that aspect of her performance and her struggles as an artist, that's interesting. And then it'll just cut back to just concert footage and fans screaming. And it's like, after a certain point, you can't help but feel like you're being pandered to, It's like, hey, look, hey, look at you. This is just like you, screaming and yelling at Billie. Isn't she the greatest? And it's like, sure, she's great. Yeah, I like her as an artist, but give me more of her. That's why I wanted to tune into this. This isn't a bad documentary by any means. I've seen way worse. But in terms of teaching me more about Billie Eilish, who she was, where some of this stuff comes from, it kind of digs a little bit into it, but never really too deep. Like, we don't get fairly deep under the skin when it comes to that before it just delves back into the usual concert video, PR stuff. It feels like it doesn't feel like we're really learning about Billie as much as it's more like a fluff piece. And I'm kind of sick of those kind of documentaries, Like, I want to know about this. And not everybody is willing to give that kind of information. But why I don't want to tune into a documentary and get treated to press releases and concert footage,
They said they would be the foundation on which a new nation would be built.
From every mound, let freedom ring.
Oh, hey, I got to finally watch this one. It's time to dig into the Wrong Turn franchise. I guess I made a wrong turn in watching this movie. Now, I'm admitting I haven't seen a lot of stuff or know a lot of things. I don't know why you guys are watching me. Just turn this off. Bye. But yeah, I haven't seen any of the Wrong Turn movies, but I have seen Phaelis's reviews of them. That's not the same thing, obviously, because Phaelis is making them watchable. But I kind of get the feeling that they were never really that great. Like, it started off with one movie that got a lot of attention, and then it slowly curdled into a bunch of direct-to-video garbage. And even this one, like, it was announced for January, and that turned into a one-night-only release. And then it didn't get anything until a month later, when it was dumped onto VOD. Yep, they sure had a lot of faith in this one, folks. And yet the thing is, this isn't even bad in a unique way. Like, this is bad in the way that a lot of horror movies are bad. The characters are underwritten, they're played poorly, there's just a lot of screaming and yelling for no reason. It relies mostly on gore, and that gore is cheap looking. Like, even the whole thing with this weird hillbilly Appalachia cult, it doesn't really amount to anything. Like, it tries to be deeper with it and make it this weird secret society thing in the mountains of Appalachia, but my God, like, I'm not even from Appalachia, but I'm just tired of the killer hillbilly trope. Like, I don't know if Deliverance was the first one to do it, but it really perpetuated it until the modern day. After a certain point, especially with Tucker and Dale versus Evil, there's really no need to make the killer hillbilly trope. Like, it'd be more interesting to have the hillbillies not be the killers for a change. Like, have the hillbillies be like the cavalry that comes at the end, and have it be more like, yeah, we're not going to let you city people, come into any harm because you're people. That sort of thing. Make them three-dimensional characters. What a concept. But no, like, this whole thing, once again, relies on the killer hillbillies up in Appalachia trope. And it's just, I'm tired. I'm so tired of people not trying hard. And maybe that's just the trope of the Wrong Turn franchise, is that it's just killer hillbillies all the way down. And in which case, I don't even think we needed it to come back. Like, even throwing in this weird hill cult of, like, moss-wearing, skull-wearing, weird secret society that lives in the wilds of Appalachia. It don't make any sense. It's just there for aesthetic reasons, and even then, they aren't that scary. Especially not when the teenagers are just screaming the whole time because they can't show fear otherwise. They're just always screaming. And then, yeah, I'm kind of at a loss for words in that regard, and that I don't know what to say about this. It's just, I've seen this in so many other horror movies before this, done better in that they doesn't suck, but still not being very good. Like, the only other thing to really talk about is the fact that they try to paint this secret society cult as, like, communist, in that they're all one collective and the weird communist ideologies thrown in. And all that made me think was, you don't see these kind of people being treated as fascists, interestingly, even though the fascists are the ones running around more often nowadays. Funny how the communists are still the bad ones, while the fascists still get to run around without any movies showing how bad they are. Funny how that works, isn't it? There really isn't even anything more to say. It's like, it perpetuates the idea of killer hillbillies again. It's badly made, cheap looking, terribly acted. Even by the end, where it tries to go into the secret society stuff, it's not very interesting. There's a stupid dream sequence twist at the end, because of course there is. This is a lazy hack job. And yeah, this whole affair was a waste. It's no wonder they dumped it out for one night only and then hoped people would forget about it.
والثورة.
Kind of sucks that South Korea put all this effort into their first big budget space opera, and then Perfect Cell came along to bust it down to Netflix. The thing is, with space operas, is they're kind of a bit more miss than hit. Success-wise, we've got Star Wars and Avatar, but then in terms of, like, quality-wise, only a few of the Star Wars movies are genuinely really good outside of being silly space operas, and Avatar doesn't really hold up that much when you break it down and rewatch it outside of the big push of 3D. You've got cult favorites like Flash Gordon, Treasure Planet, Dune. But then you've got things like John Carter, Valerian, Lost in Space, Titan AE. So, I mean, space opera is a bit of a hit or miss in terms of movies. We'll see how that new Dune turns out, but most space opera can be iffy. Like normally, like even Guardians of the Galaxy turned out better because it's a Marvel-produced space opera, so it has the Marvel, footing behind it, and then it just plays up the space opera-ness, but it still has these other comic characters that are proven to work. So, how did South Korea do when they decided to make their own just out of the blue? Honestly, a bit better. The plot here revolves around, it takes place 90 years in the future, 80 years in the future, 2092. God, that's like 70 years in the future now, Jesus. But the world is becoming more and more uninhabitable, and this mega corporation called UTS, run by Richard Armitage, is built a satellite around the Earth just for the elites, just for the special few to get in. And then you can work your way in menial dead-end jobs. And the whole time you're doing that, you have to pay taxes and fines. Just like real capitalism. Yay! You can work your way to the top if you can afford it. But yeah, it's definitely that kind of movie. It plays, we're talking that kind of movie. This movie goes in on the exploitation under capitalism. It does not shy away from that at all. But the title refers to basically space truckers. They go around space, and specifically Earth's atmosphere, picking up random debris. Rocks, space dust, satellites, various things to come in and trade in, like basically like when you recycle stuff from the garbage, or you take the tabs off of pop cans. It's that kind of menial job, and it doesn't pay well, and so you've got a lot of gambling, and they don't really dig into the crime aspect of it, although I'm sure there is an underbelly in this kind of society. There usually is. But yeah, there's a lot of exploitation and people just trying to get by. And so our crew of misfits, there's the captain's an alcoholic, the one dude is an ex-child soldier. There's an android who identifies as female and is saving up to get gender assignment surgery. That's a thing. That's a thing that's in this movie, and it's played straight. It's not played for a laugh. And I'm very curious to see how trans people view Bubs' character arc. I would really love to hear their thoughts on it. But yeah, that's kind of that. And then while they're just struggling to make ends meet, it turns out that what they believe to be an android girl named Dorothy, or dubbed Dorothy, is a property of UTS and has been fitted with a hydrogen bomb by a terrorist organization. And so the team plans to return Dorothy and get a big payout from it. But as the story goes along, Dorothy begins to showcase certain abilities. And as time goes on, it begins to unravel. Things begin to unravel, especially as we learn more about how Richard Armitage, as future space Mark Zuckerberg, is really just more like actually Elon Musk now that I think about it. He is basically future Elon Musk. But and more into how insane he is and how just he's kind of like an eco-fascist. And that things are not exactly what they appear, how the media has distorted things because there's one mega corporation controlling it, all that kind of stuff. That's all on the surface, and it does not shy away from that fact. That's the thing. Richard Armitage kind of showcased what I did not expect from this, which is, as a big budget Korean movie, I just expected it to be in Korean. I expected it to be, in Korean for the most part, and it is. But there's a global cast here, and there's a lot of English-speaking characters and actors, and I did not expect that from this. It's very aspirational in that regard, in that it's trying to be bigger and like a Hollywood-style production, and I respected that. And I really hope they try this again, even if it's not as a space opera, but if South Korea can do more productions like this, I would be all down for it. I would love to see more Korean movies put on, build up to this kind of scale. Like, why the hell not have more? Like, if China's starting to do it now, like, if South Korea wants to, absolutely have this big scale of a movie. I would absolutely love to see more Korean movies try big and, aim for the fences. Which is to say that, the effects behind this are phenomenal. Like, these are Hollywood grade effects. These are well executed CGI and visual effects. And then the practical effects, the set building, the production design. There's this thing that you don't really see a lot in space movies. You see it a bit in the original Star Wars trilogy and a bit in, like, Alien. This idea of, like, a lived-in future, where so much of the future we see in movies is always bright and clean and shiny like an Apple store, and then you don't really see the dingy underbelly of things. The fact that things are rusty and oily and gringy, and they're broken, and so they have repair damage from when they were fixed so many times. And you really see that a lot in this movie. This movie feels lived in. And then you go over to the fancy satellite where the rich people are staying, and it's all nice and pristine and pretty looking. And then you go to where everyone else is living, and it's dingy and dark and grimy and dirty, and it's that kind of lived in feeling. You get that from this movie. That shows that they definitely paid close attention to even the little details when it comes to that. And I think whoever was behind this, just keep giving them work. Find them work to do all the time. Hollywood, China, South Korea, Japan, whoever's making movies, give these people work because they deserve it. On top of that, the cast is good too. I've mentioned Richard Armitage, he's fantastic. But even the Korean cast, they're all really well done. And even the voice of, like, Bubs the Android is solid. So the cast here is all good. There's some with, like, the English speaking besides Richard Armitage cast that kind of struggles a bit. I just took that as, like, because this is a mixed language production, there's probably some things lost in translation, but it works well enough, and it definitely feels cohesive in that regard. It never fully distracts from the movie as a whole in the story, which is a very interesting story as more and more of it unraveled. And I really liked it. It kind of got a Cowboy Bebop vibe from this crew, from this captain, from the tough, the heavy, they call Tiger, Uncle Tiger at one point by the kid. But the really interesting one is Taeho. Taeho? I want to say Taeho. He's a child soldier, and his big thing is trying to find his lost daughter, who was blown out. Well, daughter. He adopted a girl who was a casualty, whose family was a casualty of one of their assaults, or whatever you call the things. Part of his military action, he noticed that this little girl lost her family, and he adopted her. And she lost her hearing because of the battle, and so he felt responsible for all this, and he wanted to raise her. But because he decided to not be a soldier anymore, he ended up living in the grime and the dirt, and he wanted to give her more, the life that he felt she deserved, but he couldn't afford it, so he started gambling, and he became neglectful, and then he lost her after debris crashed through and sent her off into space. And so he's been raising money to try and locate her, because apparently she has the ability to survive somehow. I think nanobots play a big part in all of it. But he's trying to get enough money to find her and make some kind of contact with her before she is unsavable. But that drives him to do little less ethical things. Like, he is so driven and blinded by the money that he begins to risk the crew around him, and especially Dorothy. He's so bent on getting money for Dorothy that he begins to lose sight of everything, and bad things happen because he is so driven by the money. And it's his journey to realize that, his desire to get his daughter back has led to terrible things happening, and that he needs to make amends for it. And that the idea that the road to heaven is paved with, the road to hell, I should say, is paved with good intentions. He's made things worse because he's been wanting to find his daughter. And if he had been more focused on helping those around him and being in the present, maybe things wouldn't have turned out the way they did. But because he was so driven to, just for good reason, to wanting to find this adopted daughter, it maybe if he had cared more about being in the moment, that he would have had a better chance to, if he wasn't so, obsessed with getting the money to find her. It's a really interesting character study. I would love to see somebody break it down more thoroughly. But yeah, the other thing this doesn't shy away from is the fact that Armitage is definitely the villain. He plays himself up as some great hero saving humanity, but he's an eco-fascist. He's essentially Thanos in a way. He thinks the best way to save humanity is by basically terraforming Mars and not giving a shit about Earth. Basically, he is Bill Gates and Elon Musk and all of these big-time billionaires who could fix the problems on this planet fairly easily, but it would be much more profitable to do things their way and go into space and continue exploiting the people at the bottom. They're not going to solve the real underlying issues behind poverty and want and greed in society, even though they have all of the means in the world to do it, because that wouldn't be profitable. Now, would it? Capitalism's great, y'all. But yeah, Armitage nails that to a T. He is so high on his own narcissism that he thinks he is doing such wonderful deeds. And then you begin to see, first you think, oh, he's so altruistic, he's such a great guy, he's doing so much. And then as we learn more, he is a narcissistic, egomaniacal, crazy person. He is so bent on running things and controlling the path of human society as we see it. That he's an eco-fascist, like Thanos. You begin to see, they basically call out people like Bill Gates and Elon Musk that, you guys think you're some heroes patting yourselves on the back for all the good you do? What are you really doing? Like, they're taking a look at Bill Gates and Elon Musk going, hey, this you? Because this looked like you. The only real issues I had with the movie kind of stem from the girl Dorothy. Her actress isn't terrible, but she's kind of that kid-level wooden acting, and that it's not great, but it's not terrible. But there's also a running gag with her farting that feels very out of place. Like, this movie is, not always serious. Like, there's levity to it, but it's at least taking itself seriously. There's levity, but it's not, silly. And then every so often it'll just be like, fart. It's like, this kid farts, apparently. And it's like, it feels like a weird, out of place character beat for her. Like, what's with the farting? Like, fart jokes can be funny, sure. Like, I'm not against fart humor, but it feels weirdly executed here. It feels out of place. Maybe that was the point, that it was supposed to be out of place and therefore funnier, but I don't know. It feels like, it didn't feel like it fit in with the rest of the movie and kind of took me out of it, but that's just me. In any case, I do think you should watch Space Sweepers. Pick of the week by far. It's definitely worth checking out, especially if you're into big space operas. And it's a fantastic movie, and I really hope whoever's behind this gets to make more of them, even with perfect sell around. Hey, speaking of big budget Asian blockbusters, let's head over to China for this one. Now, the thing in dealing with Chinese cinema is so much of their productions are tied into the government that a lot of times it feels like you can't talk about the films themselves without talking about where the money is coming from. You saw a bit of this with Mulan, the remake as well, because so much of that felt like it was at the behest and at the approval of the Chinese government. And you begin to wonder how much of that, I'm not familiar with how Chinese film companies operate, how much of them has to be, approved by the government in order to run through. I would love to do, I would love to be able to bring on actual Chinese film critics and film reviewers and filmmakers, even if possible, to talk about that sort of stuff. But as for me from the outside, I kind of get this idea that there's a bit of exactly what we get from the American military here, where the Chinese government has a lot of sway over what messages and stories are being told. And while it's not as bad as it used to be over here, there's definitely a hint of when you feature the U.S. military, they're the good guys. And even though sometimes they ease a bit off of that, like they do try to be more critical of it, especially you see it in the MCU, but you can kind of see that they're still being used as recruitment videos a lot. Like, the defense budget pays Hollywood a lot of money to make them look good for recruitment ads. And I think there's a similar, that's closest we have to it here, but I feel like there's something similar going on, and I've heard there's something similar going on in Chinese cinema, so it feels disingenuous to not talk about it, but I'm also not qualified to talk about it either. So I am going to focus more on the movie, but just know that that's always kind of an undercurrent. I guess it's an undercurrent with every big budget movie, because there's always somebody's financing it. Who's financing it and what do they have to gain from it is the question. Personally, that crossover I'm hoping for is with Shirin J. Zhao, but it's just me. I like her. She makes good stuff. Go check her out. She makes amazing videos. Link in the description. In any case, the movie we're actually talking about is the Yin-Yang Master, which is actually an adaptation of a Japanese novel series. Like, there's even a game series based on it. There's a manga series. I don't know if they made an anime, but there's a series called Onmyoji in Japan. And apparently it's a pretty decent-sized franchise. It's been going on since, I think, the 80s or the 90s. And it deals with an onmyodo. And which is basically like a sort of astrologer, natural scientist, sort of like spiritual guide, I guess. I'm not quite sure how best to describe it, but they deal with a lot of spiritualism, magic, and sciences, mainly tied into the yin and the yang concepts, as well as the 5 elements, which are big in Chinese mythology and culture. And you see that passed along even through Japanese media as well. This idea of like the 5 elements, earth, air, water, wood, fire, all that stuff, that even ties into things like acupuncture and whatnot. So that's kind of what the Onmyodo do. The lead character in that is an Onmyodo. And then here they've transplanted that story from Japan to ancient China. I don't know which specific era, what other mythologies they bring into it, or cultural history. Once again, I'm not as well versed. We did take a class on it in college. It was a nice class, but I'm not sure of the specifics, and I didn't really pick up on what time era they're going for or what cultural mythology they were specifically citing. But the idea is that you've got the Yin-Yang Master, who is this guy who has all this magic because of his study of the yin and the yang. Basically, the plot surrounds this student to a wizard, I guess, is what you would call it. I mean, he's kind of like Doctor Strange. There's a lot of the Doctor Strange circles here, which I'm guessing they took from this kind of thing, this kind of media beforehand, which makes sense because Doctor Strange co-opts a lot of that sort of mythology into his backstory, but that's the story for another day. In any case, this guy, there's this teacher who's trying to keep back a dark serpent who is the embodiment of the yang, the badness. And he is coming after the Empress, and the master sacrifices himself to keep the serpent at bay, while the student goes to the Empress in order to... I guess that would signify that there's only one period of Chinese history that this could take place in, but I digress. In any case, he goes to her to try, and I guess there's a lot of lore, and I got lost in a lot of it, because there is deep dumps of background and lore, and I got lost for a lot of it. All I know is that the wizard boy whose master died because he wasn't good enough goes to the Empress and is trying to get the necessary, try to protect her from this giant serpent coming. And then something happens, there's a big giant fight with the giant serpent at the end, and there's a lot of special effects and wuxia. This is a wuxia movie, basically. And I feel like it suffers a bit from what a lot of high fantasy stories suffer from, which is this Tolkien effect of informational dumps. Just like, hey, boom, here's all the homework. Here's what you're going to need to understand this story. Bye. And it's like, and so you get lost and you lose interest. I didn't lose too much interest, but it still felt like, boom, all of this homework is in front of me. I'm just like, I'll skim through it, I guess. I don't know, man. I ain't got time to do homework. And I don't know if this worked better if you're already immersed in the history and culture. That's why, once again, I would love to talk to Shirin J. Zhao or some other Chinese YouTuber, film reviewer, critic, writer, whatever. Get some more insight from them. And but as an outsider even, I respected the budget in that the effects work was really good. You know, it's a solid wuxia movie. Effects look good. The CGI is very obviously CGI, but it worked good for what it was doing. I mean, it's on par with a bunch of Marvel movies, the DC Universe, Star Wars. So, I mean, it's on par with Hollywood. So, you're not, it's like, oh, this looks bad. And then you look over at Hollywood and you're like, these two pictures are the same. So, in terms of that, in terms of the budget, in terms of the costume design, once again, it's a period piece in China. It all looks good. And, I don't have any complaints about that. My big complaints are the fact that I have no idea what's going on at points. Maybe it's because the Onmyoji story is a bit convoluted. Maybe it's because something got lost. I did make sure to watch this in the original Mandarin. I realized that mistake from Below Zero, where I had to turn on the original Mandarin in order to watch it without the dub. But even in the original Mandarin, as the movie was made, man, I got lost, and I don't know that a dub would have helped. But yeah, it's a solid movie. It's not a badly made movie. The acting, it's probably standard for wuxia. I'm not as familiar with wuxia. I don't know how good the acting is. So I'm not criticizing the acting. I'm mainly criticizing the fact that I have no idea what's going on, man. And that's not because I didn't pay attention. That's because things are going by so fast and happening so much, and there's so much information just landing in front of you at all times, and I'm just like, I can't keep up with this, man. It's the same problem you get with things like the Mortal Engines, or what's another really good one that does this? I think Dune, the original Dune, suffers a bit from this. You see this a lot in high fantasy movies because they're trying to give you so much backstory, and just tell me, like, that's the thing. We didn't get all the backstory for Star Wars until after the fact. We didn't get all the backstory for Lord of the Rings until after the fact. Just tell me the story. We don't need to know all the details. We'll worry about the details when we get there. I think that's the problem that so many people face. I think because Tolkien established that sort of, because he was a scholar, because he was an English professor, because he was such a nerd, that he dumped all of this information in because he wanted to be explained, like, well, here's how this thing worked, there's where this thing came from. And if you check the appendices, and it's just like, just tell me a story, Grandpa. I don't need a history lecture on a place that doesn't exist. This isn't as bad as that, though, but it is I think so much of high fantasy is in the shadow of Tolkien, that everyone thinks they need to world build to a point where everything has to be explained, and there has to be a 20-page backstory about where something came from, even though it bears nothing for the plot, you know? And I think that's kind of the issue here. That being said, I will absolutely check out more of these Chinese blockbusters, and just Chinese film in general. Chinese film is a missing, well, foreign film in general, is a missing chunk of my filmography, and hopefully through things like Netflix, through Hulu, through Amazon Prime, more and more of these international films can get an American release, and we can just share and film from across the world. That's fun. I like it. More of that, please. So we'll see if other stuff will catch my eye and work better for me. But yeah, the Yin-Yang Master, there's going to be another one coming, also called the Yin-Yang Master, but spelled slightly differently. But that one's going to be based on the Onmyoji game and not the novels. So it's like if somebody made a side series to The Witcher that was based on The Witcher games and not The Witcher novels. And it's super weird, but if it's good, it's good. I'll review it when it comes out, if it comes out anywhere near me. Next time, we've got Amy Poehler's new movie Moxie coming to Netflix. Raya and the Last Dragon, which I would see in theaters if Perfect Cell wasn't out there waiting for me. So I'm going to be a sucker and pay $30 for it. But I hear good things about it, so hopefully it'll be worth the $30 more than Mulan ever would be. We've also got the latest from Joe Carnahan, featuring Mel Gibson, Joy, as well as Coming to America, the sequel to Coming to America. And it's going to be interesting to cover both of those again. It's been a hot minute since I watched the original, and I'm definitely going to watch it for the sequel. And the sequel looks really good, so we'll see. Until next time, I'm John Bailey, and remember, if a cat and mouse are arguing your drug case to Korean astronauts in ancient China, you probably made a wrong turn. See you later, folks.